morning to everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Rose Morgan. I'm the Chief Executive of Heart of London Business Alliance, and we represent a cross-sector of businesses in central London. We're here to talk about business rates, the joy, and we've certainly learned to love them. So we all know that the current business rate system is no longer fit for the modern economy. Our view is that it penalises success, it holds back investment, and it threatens jobs. So completely does the opposite of promote growth. But there's a better way forward, we've discovered. So our combined business rates offers a simple and fair and sustainable solution. So it would cut bills by around 40%, and it would level the playing field between online and physical businesses and still protect Treasury's revenues. So you'll be excited to hear from Paul on that. And today we'll look ahead to the upcoming budget and the potential impact on London, but also the UK economy, and how we together can make a case for real rates reform that supports growth and confidence and the city's recovery. We're still recovering from it, but the pandemic, as you well know. So without further ado, you're going to hear from Alex Shan and Paul Barnes, and then we're going to take some Q&As, and then I will sum up. Alex is going to talk about the forthcoming budget and potentially, what to expect and what the impact might be. And then Paul will talk about the solution, which is the combined business rates proposal. And also he'll touch on the campaign that we're running post-budget, where we'll be inviting you to join us. So without further ado, Alex, I will hand over to you.
Many thanks, Ros, and welcome everybody. There's nothing to stir the soul like business rates reform early on a Thursday morning, but here goes. I mean, I appreciate a number of people in the webinar will be more expert on much of what is planned than I am, but hopefully I can give everybody a reasonable sort of overview of what we think the government has been up to and then what may be announced in the budget. But just to reinforce the point, there is a degree of uncertainty about certainly where some of the numbers are going to land. So do sort of bear that in mind when I talk about specific figures. So next slide, please, Sydney.
That was quick, Alex.
Yep, right.
Well done.
Now back to the studio.
Alex, Sydney, if we could get up the slides again. Do you want to start talking through them anyway, Alex?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, as that's great. Thank you. Thanks, Sydney. That's brilliant. I mean, as Ros has already said, the one area I think we all agree is that the present system needs to be reformed. And, credit to the government, they've recognised that. But by way of context, business rates in England, and we are talking about England here because business rates in Scotland and Wales are more of a devolved matter. They rise about a quarter of the total of local government income, really, rather than expenditure. And it's all told that's around 100 billion a year. So we're talking about 26 billion being raised by business rates, which is a significant amount of money. Because of COVID in particular and other pressures, the previous governments introduced temporary relief for smaller retail, hospitality and leisure value hereditaments. And it's important to remember we often talk about smaller businesses and large businesses, but actually the whole system is geared around the rateable value of individual hereditaments. So understandably, and it received a lot of positive support. The government introduced temporary reliefs, 100% and 75%, and then this year it dropped down to 40% of relief for some retail, hospitality and leisure properties. And, and very importantly, those limits were subject to a cash ceiling of 110,000 per business rather than per hereditament. So if you were Tesco's, you got 110,000 of relief. And if you were a local shop owner or you own two or three shops, you also got 110,000. That's important, A, because it reflected the requirements under state aid regulation. But B, we think that's now going to change, and that will have a potentially big impact in cost terms. And we estimate that the cost of the existing program of reliefs was perhaps 2.5 billion when it was at 75%, and this year it's probably more likely in the range of 1.3 billion. Now, going forward, what the government has said is it wants to pay for um, those reductions in the business rates paid for by retail, hospitality, and leisure uh, property renters with a higher multiplier on all businesses with an RV of above 500,000. So that includes offices, industrials, and indeed the retail, hospitality, and leisure businesses who occupy premises with an RV of more than 500,000. And up until this point, that relief, as it was called, was paid for by the Exchequer from other sources. Okay, so this is a shift of the burden of the reliefs, as they were, to within the business rate system, which is I guess, Ros, why we're all here today, because this is going to affect, surprise, surprise, Central London and many of HOBA's members, because they will fall into that category around the RV of more than 500,000. Okay, next slide, please, Sydney. Okay. So the legislation, I think, Paul, I'm right in saying, has now been passed under which that change will take place, and the government's intention is that change will kick in from April of 2026. And what the legislation provides for is a maximum discount of 20 pence for smaller multipliers, so that's below 500,000, um, and a maximum uplift of 10 pence to the standard multiplier for those properties with an RV of more than 500,000. So, what does that mean in practical terms? Well, at the moment, the multiplier is around 51 pence, the standard multiplier. So effectively, if it was fully implemented at 10p, then that would, for larger businesses, that would equate to an increase of nearly 20%. Now, the slight complication here is that the rateable list is being updated to reflect 2024 values. It was based on 2020 values, course, in the period in COVID. So actually, the rateable value list is probably going to change. And I think work by JLL says that the actual rateable value list, and therefore the poundage, is likely to go up. So that 51, sorry, is likely to go down slightly to reflect a high rateable value. So although we're saying around 51.2 here, that standard multiplier is likely to fall, which reflects the fact that valuations have gone up. So the government is giving itself the ability to make that variation. As I say, a discount of up to 20p for smaller multiplier values, and an increase of up to 10 pence, or around 20% in terms of what's paid for higher value business. And one of the points that we have highlighted is that this risks creating cliff edge thresholds at the valuation point, particularly around the 500,000 valuation point. Because what it means is if you're paying just below 500,000, or rather, if you're paying just over 500,000, your 20%, your bill may be, indicatively 20% bigger than if it was just below 500,000. And that, I think that is a real area of concern, just in terms of jamming up the system, and in terms of the number of appeals that might be brought by ratepayers who have been classed at £501,000 instead of 499,000, if you get my meaning. Um, And the other thing that the government has said, which is also very important, is that the small, up to date, up till now, the discount for RHL businesses with a lower rateable value was set at 51,000. So only businesses with a rateable value of up to 51,000 were able to get some of the discounts I mentioned. In the new world, the government has said that businesses with an RV of between 51,000 and 500,000 will benefit. Okay. Um, and as I mentioned before, the reductions the government is saying will not be capped at 110,000. Now, the other thing that's going on before we just get on to what we think the impacts for London businesses are going to be, the other thing to observe is that this change is coming at the same time, as many of you will know, as the revaluation, which I've just mentioned, the sort of the reintegration of the valuation office agency back into HMRC. Um, and then a range of local government changes around business rates, retention reset, um, local authority reorganisation outside of London, and something called Fair Funding Review 2.0, which has been looking at how different local authorities in England receive money. And you'll have seen this stuff in the press. Around the needs-based assessment. And there's been a lot of concern that the Fair Funding Review would have led to local authorities, particularly in inner London, seeing very significant reductions in their grants from central government. That comes on top of these other changes, which are going to see more money taken out of central London, inner London, to pay for activities and services elsewhere in the country. Okay, I know that's a lot to take in, and we will put the slides in the chat, and there's a fuller report that we worked on, which I know is available on HOBA's website. So next slide, please, Sydney. Okay, so what does all this mean? Well, um, we have estimated that the value of the increased business rate burden on higher rateable value occupiers before lifting of that £110,000 cap per business could be as much as 2.2 billion for England. Now, with the cap lifted, we have indicatively estimated that the increase in burden could be as much as 4 billion. So remember, we were talking about a total sort of tax take of 26 billion. So we're talking about a significant increase to the total take from business rates, but this burden falls specifically on those entities with these higher rateable values. And, not unlike other aspects of the tax system, what you then find is that out of around 2 million hereditaments, property occupiers, around 16,000 of them out of the 2 million, so about 0.8% of the total, would be bearing this increase of between 2.2 and 4 billion pounds. And that 0.8% of property occupiers out of the 2 million, so this is the 16,000, accounts for around a third of total rateable value within the system. So it's a bit like the top 1% of income taxpayers pay around a third of all income tax. And perhaps not surprisingly, around 1 in 3 of those 16,000 are in Greater London, and around 5,000 are in Inner London, so what used to be the old Inner London boroughs. And they represent around 11% of total rateable value of properties in England. So what might that mean for inner London businesses? Well, a 10 pence increase in the multiplier for businesses with a rateable value of more than 500,000, we think could cost those businesses between sort of around 800 million per annum for inner London and £1 billion for Greater London. And those figures, as they're based on the 2023 valuations. Okay, so the 2020 a rateable value list. When you take into account there's going to be a revaluation, that figure could be even more because a lot of London businesses' properties have grown in value, their rateable values increased since COVID. And in terms of where the impact will be, you won't be surprised to know that it's the City of London, Westminster and Camden in particular, that will be hardest hit by that increase of between 800 million plus and a billion, or 800 million in the case of inner London. It's City of Westminster, City of London and Camden who will be hardest hit. The other thing I'd just say as a footnote to all of this, none of this raises more money for local government in London. So it's entirely possible for the government to make these changes and for local government in London to actually receive less income, less grant, even though businesses are paying more into the pot for money that's then spent across the country. Okay, next slide, please. There's only one, I think, to go, and then we can go back to the conversation and what we think we should be doing next. So since the work that I've just outlined, tried to summarize, was completed in January, as this policy has gained a bit more visibility and a consultation exercise has been gone through with the business community, there have been a few sort of straws in the wind as to what may or may not be changing. So the first one, which is a technical issue, is acknowledgement by the government that this sort of slab-based approach, which is used to say at this point you pay, you jump into a much higher bracket of business rate payment, that they recognize that that might not be such a great idea because it creates these precipices. Now, that's more in the context of what they call the investment effect of small businesses rate relief, but it may be that the government doesn't have this sort of cliff edge change at 500,000 for the reasons that I mentioned earlier around appeals and all the rest of it. But we need to wait and see. The second thing is that large food retailers, so this is Tesco's, Asda, and so on, have been on the warpath, and they have basically said to the government, if you make this change, which would affect our larger stores, our Tesco Extras and the big out of town type enterprises, that's going to lead to increases in food prices. And of course, politically, that's a very challenging issue for the government, given the pressure on cost of living, which continues apace, even though it's less intense than it was a couple of years ago. And the government has indicated that the sector, quote unquote, has been listened to. So there may be exemptions for the larger food retailers. Now that's kind of withstanding the fact that that cap I mentioned before of 110,000 we think is going to be lifted. So there might be quite substantive gains for the major chains because they have so many properties. And then the third thing, partly in response to the indication that the retailers might get exemptions to this big increase in the supplement, is that the wholesalers are now saying they're crying foul and saying that's not fair if they have to pay it, but the retailers don't. So there's sort of, and Paul is on top of this, but there's some rumbling in the jungle that the wholesalers are potentially going to sort of threaten judicial review and all the rest of it if they are not treated more leniently and if retailers are treated favorably. So to summarize, really, we'll know the answers to lots of these questions at the budget. I think the government is going to finally issue an impact statement associated with this policy at the same time as the numbers are announced on the budget. But the work that we've done, JLL Colliers have done to date, is really based on sort of informed estimates, guesstimating how we think the system's going to play out in terms of the impact that many of the people on this call will feel, particularly from an inner London, from a Westminster, from a HOLBA member perspective.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, I think it's important to say and caveat our work in terms of we've worked with the information and the data that we have, and we don't have that full impact assessment from government because they hadn't produced it yet, or they haven't produced it yet. So we'll be able to explore that further post budget. And I know that we've got another webinar coming up where we'll be able to really delve into the actual data. I mean, just to comment before I hand over to Paul, we were given a figure yesterday that there would be about 1,700 businesses in Westminster that meet that 500,000 threshold currently, and that's before the revaluation. So it's significant. If our attendees are primarily Westminster businesses, you could be one of them. The interesting last slide there about retailers, wholesalers, myself and Paul and yourself have talked about this. The whole scenario is causing a bun fight between sectors and industries, and actually we need the whole ecosystem to work in tandem. And actually that brings us nicely on to, rather than setting one industry or one sector up against the other, we've got a solution that will completely avoid that, and that we can come back together as a full ecosystem that's driving growth across the UK economy. Is that a nice leeway into you, Paul, to talk about combined business rates?
As always, well, brilliant. Thank you. And thank you also to Alex for fairly horrific overview of what might be about to hit us when we get the budget in a week or so's time. I'm going to talk in a second about the alternative combined business rates proposal that HOLBA has put together. But I think just to put everything into context, let's just take this back to how we got to this stage and why Alex has had to do all this work to look at what the sort of impact is likely to be. The government made the decision, the new government made the decision that it would protect that 40% discount to business rates for retail, hospitality and leisure. Let's call them high street businesses. A lot of pressure from the industry not to get rid of that because of cost pressures on high streets in particular. And so they said, yes, okay, we'll keep it. But the big change they made was say, we'll keep it, but we're not going to pay for it anymore. Because previously it was paid for from the Exchequer. So businesses would pay their business rates and then the Exchequer would give a refund, a relief to those businesses that were eligible for that 40% cutoff or refund. So the big change is who's going to pay for it. It's still going to be there, but it's got to be paid somehow. And the government has said very clearly, it's up to the other business rates payers to pay for this. It's not going to come directly from the Exchequer. Now, Alex has thrown a whole lot of numbers out. The current cost of the 40% refund or relief is around about 1.3 billion a year. If that cap comes off and everybody goes for it, but I'm sure the government won't allow that to happen, but it could go up to about 4 billion a year. So the figure will be somewhere between 1.3 billion and 4 billion. So let's say 2.5 billion, something like that. That's an additional tax. That's £2 billion of tax that wasn't there a year ago. It was covered from the Exchequer's funding, and that's going to hit business rates payers. So the government went out to consultation on that, and we were asked by HOLBA to have a look at it to see what the impact would be in order that HOLBA could give a good response to that consultation. And the big problem was that because by chance this new proposal comes in at exactly the same time as a revaluation is going on, they happen once every 3 years, it allows the government to say, quite rightly, we can't tell you what the impact of this is going to be because it will depend on what the revaluation says, and we won't know the results of that revaluation until just before the budget. So effectively, you will get your impact assessment at the same time as we announce what we're going to do. So it was really pretty difficult to know how to respond to this consultation because we didn't really know how it was going to hit us. And that's why we asked Alex and colleagues to produce an impact assessment based on the current revaluation. And if we're right, and I'm sure we are going to be right, that London is going to be hit hardest from this revaluation, what we've done is the best case scenario, and it's probably likely to be worse. So we've done that we've done that impact assessment just so that we could then know how best to respond to the consultation. And the result of that impact assessment, as Alex said, was that although there's the new higher rate multiplier that's going to come in that is effectively going to cover most of the cost of this 1.2, 1.3 plus billion pound new tax. 33% of that will be paid from London businesses, but because of their value, they're probably going to end up paying about 45%. Nearly half of all that will be paid by London businesses. That's maybe £1 billion additional tax. That also then comes with the revaluation, and the general view is that the revaluation will see central London property rateable values go up by about 20%. So put together, we're probably looking at about a £2 billion additional tax burden on properties in central London as a result of the revaluation and the need for this new 40% permanent relief to be paid for by business ratepayers, not by the government. So that's the situation we're in. And we will know the exact figures when we hear them from the Chancellor in the budget in a week and a bit's time. But even before we hear them, we know it's going to be a big hit on the UK, on London. We think there's also going to be difficulties in managing the system because at the moment Alex talked about the valuation office being reorganised, being brought back in-house with HMRC. That's a major reorganisation at just the time when a revaluation is taking place. And that is a sort of recipe for a little bit of chaos, I would have thought. There are still 20,000 challenges from the 2023 revaluation, which have not yet been sorted. They've got to be sorted. There will be a huge number of challenges anyway to this revaluation. But as Alex said, if you've then got a number of businesses where the £1 difference between being valued at 499,000 rateable value and 500,000 rateable value effectively will cost you as a business an additional £150,000 in business rates over the next 3-year period. Now, you're going to challenge that if you're just on that border. So we think that there'll be difficulty in dealing with the amount of challenges that are likely to come as this programme gets implemented. So it all looks pretty dire, but we'll see the final outcome when it comes through in the budget, and we'll see how best to respond to that.
Well, just before you get to the solution, which is the exciting part, just to remind everybody that you can submit your questions as we go into the Q&A. There's a little Q&A box there, so please fire away. I see that there's quite a few from anonymous attendees. I assume that's people thinking that they're asking a stupid question. There are no stupid questions. We are happy to answer them all, and please feel free to do them anonymously or put your name to them. We won't judge you. So, sorry, Paul, back to you.
No, that's okay. So where we are as a result of seeing that impact assessment, what the impact is likely to be on central London, the potential difficulties in the valuation office and dealing with all of this, the HOLBA had no alternative but to say in response to the consultation, we don't think this is a good idea. And we think actually the problem is the whole business rate system. The reason we've got to come up with this 40% permanent relief is because it's a sticking plaster, because the business rates system is becoming more and more expensive, and sectors of the economy are finding it difficult to meet their business rates rises and bills generally. So we think the issue, the longer term issue, is to look again at the whole system. The government has made it clear that this is not the end of business rates reform in this parliament, and that they're looking at other ideas. So we would hope that once everybody sees what the impact is going to be in the budget, that everybody comes along to where we are now and says, something's got to be done about this system. And we'd hope also, and the messaging we're getting back is that the government would be open to hearing ways for reforming the business rate system as a whole. So HOLBA always looking positively and not wanting just to say, we don't like this, so no, we don't like it. We want to be positive, and HOLBA said, we got a solution for you. And we spent a lot of time and effort in putting together a solution that not only works practically, but works politically and can be delivered, and delivered fairly quickly. My view is we could deliver this by the next budget, 2026. So what is it? What have we come up with? We've come up with some principles. First of all, the first principle is that all businesses should pay their fair share towards the funding of local government services. That's a basic principle. Everybody should agree with that, no question. Secondly, we've acknowledged that the Treasury does not want to get rid of business rates as a system of taxation. The Treasury likes business rates because it's a standard, it's a block of money, 26 billion they get in every year, no matter how the economy is doing, and it's difficult for business rate payers to avoid because property is difficult to hide. So they like it. So the thought of going in and saying, let's have a total change, yeah, that might happen, but probably not in the short term. So what we said was we need to build on the business rate system rather than replace it and make it so that it better reflects the current economy of the UK. Because back in 1990, when the business rate system first came in, virtually 100% of UK economy was operating from businesses in bricks and mortar across the country. And therefore, looking at the value of a property that a business uses could give you a fair guess, an estimate of how much they should be prepared to pay as their fair share. And that sort of made sense. Jump forward 35 years, and the digital economy, which hardly existed at all in 1990, is now in excess of 20% of the UK economy, and it's likely to be growing. It is growing, and it's going to hit 30% within the next 5 years or so. So we've now got a business rate system set up for an economy that no longer exists. It has changed, and it's no fault at all of the digital sector that they don't pay what I would say is their fair share. They pay what legally they have to pay, absolutely right. But they're a property light sector. They just don't use property, and it's not a good way anymore to judge the value of those businesses and how much should be their fair contribution to the funding of local government finance. So on the basis that we're not going to get rid of business rates, what we have to do is to evolve that system so that it matches the changes that have taken place in the economy over the last 35 years or so. And we looked at the 4 main business taxes that can be paid. And of those 4, 3 of them are generally relatively easy to avoid in a legal way by digital economy businesses. Whether it be business rates, well, we've just had that conversation, whether it be corporation tax, some digital businesses never declare a profit, so they don't pay that. Employers' national insurance, well, you know, the amount of employment, traditional employment that takes place and the way in which they're paid means that the digital sector can avoid paying too much for that. The one thing they can't avoid paying, and you can see that they pay their fair share, is VAT. They all pay their 20% VAT for online activities. So clearly, if you're going to add to the business rate system to create this new combined business rate, the area you look at is some sort of sales tax. Now, the Treasury has looked at this in the past and said no to it, and they did that for 2 reasons. They looked at online retail sales, which they reckon would raise about £1 billion a year. And they wanted to set up a whole new tax system to collect that money, assess it and collect it, which they reckon would cost in excess of £1 billion a year. So it actually would cost the government rather than make any money. So what we're saying is, look, why are you just looking at online retail? You should really be looking at all online businesses because they all should be paying their fair share. And if you look at all online businesses, then that 1 billion goes up to 3 billion for a 1% levy, a small 1% levy. You get 3 billion. So a 2% levy, which is what we're suggesting, gets you £6 billion in income. And if you use the VAT tax structure, it's not VAT, but the tax structure is in place. It will allow you to assess how much each individual business should pay, and it's got the structure there to collect that money. So you don't need a new tax system. Now, when we say all online sales should be covered, there are some exemptions to that. Firstly, financial services. You take that out because that's such a big, different sector of the economy. We just don't touch it, don't go there. Nobody's ever suggested going there. But there are some other sections of the economy which we also think should be looked at for exemption. And in particular, given the government's support for high streets, what we should be looking at is ensuring that those online sales that benefit high streets and bring people into them so that they spend money while they're there should be exempt. So what would they be? Theatre tickets. Don't charge this on theatre tickets, because theatre tickets bring people into town to sit and watch in the theatre. Click and collect, exactly the same. That is a system that brings people into town, and while they're in town, they'll spend more money. UK hotel bookings, take that off, because that is bringing people into town city centres. There's a group of activities and sales online which actually support the vitality and vibrancy of town and city centres. You exempt them. It's not a huge amount in terms of the amount we're talking about, but it does make a difference to town and city centres. So let's have a look and see what that would do. The key elements then of our business rate, combined business rate, are this. Firstly, I mentioned a 2p levy on all online sales, excluding these various high street supporting elements. That would raise £6 billion a year, okay? And you'd use the existing VAT system to assess and collect it, so no extra cost there. And don't forget that the VAT system, if you use that, that would exempt businesses with an under £90,000 turnover a year. So your small businesses would be exempt from any of this. If you had that 6 billion, you could cut the multiplier. You don't need lots of different multipliers, because you just have the original multiplier from back in 1990, which was set at 34.8, say 35p is what it was set at. The standard rate now is 55p, so it's not quite double, but it's getting there. If you put it back to that 1990 level, many businesses we talked to said that's affordable. We don't have a problem with that. That's affordable. And because it's affordable, you don't need all these various reliefs. They'd have to be looked at one by one, but you don't need lots of different multipliers, lots of different reliefs and such like. The small business multiplier didn't come in until 2005. That's 15 years after the business rates were first brought in. So you could actually set that multiplier at 35p, the 1990 level. That would raise 24 billion, but it would mean that every business would get around about a 40% cut in their business rates across the whole of the country. So if you add that 24 billion with the 6 billion you'd get from the new levy, you're up to 30 billion. Well, the government's target is what? 28, well, it's 26 billion this year, wasn't it, Alex? 28 billion next year. This is more than the government has set as its target. So we have a system here that would make sure that all businesses paid their fair share, including those online, and raised more money, as much or more money than the Treasury actually wanted, but gave all business rate payers a 40% cut in their business rates. There must be a catch. I don't know what it is. I can't see the catch. It's been inside out, upside down. I can't see the catch. I can't see where there's a but. There isn't. The but is that all digital businesses should pay their fair share, and that this is a simple way of ensuring they do. No one could object to that. And that we have a much simpler system. And by the way, it would then eliminate most of the challenges to the VOA, because no one's going to appeal against a 40% cut in their business rates. And it could be done fairly simply without any additional legislation, because it can all be implemented as part of the finance bill. You just say the multipliers this year, we're getting rid of all the multipliers. We'll have one set multiplier at 34.8p. And you say we're also going to use the VAT system to put a 2% levy on all online sales. And that's it. You've done it. Now, there must be a catch, and I'm looking forward to the Treasury telling us why it won't work. But we've tried this with experts in the business rate system, with people who absolutely know this inside out and upside down, and they go, we can't see a problem with it. So this is what we're going to be looking to take forward to the government once we see what the outcome of the budget is. because at the moment, there's not that much concern amongst businesses about business rates because the government hasn't done an impact assessment. Nobody really knows what's likely to hit them when it comes on the 26th of November. But I think when businesses do see what their business rates are going to be, then they will be a lot more concerned than they are at the moment. And very helpfully, HOLBA is setting up, we hope to have on our website, a business rates calculator, which will allow you on the day to say, to bang in your address, and it will say, this is what you were paying in business rates, and this is what you're going to pay, and here's the difference. And I think when people see that, they will say, we've got to do something about this. And the something about this is the combined business rate. It's the only one, I think, that fairly works and actually delivers the funds and actually makes sure that everybody pays their fair share. So it brings the system up to the 21st century. It takes account of the way in which the economy goes. It means equality throughout, so that all businesses are paying. And what the key element of it is that if you think about it, as the proportion of the economy that was property-based shrinks, it's gone from 100% in 1990 to 80% now, the business rates tax base is shrinking as well. And it's going to shrink even more. And what's happening is that the government is constantly seeking, any government, not just this one, constantly seeking greater amounts of money from the business rate system from a declining tax base. And that's why these huge hits are coming in. So what we really need is to say, let's, instead of just putting higher business rate bills on a declining tax base, let's just widen the tax base to make sure everybody pays their fair share and the business rate system is fit for purpose for a 21st century digital economy. That's where we are. And one final thing to say, by the way, we wouldn't be outriders on this because Ireland and the UK are the only countries in the Western world who used 100% property-based taxes to fund local government. Virtually every other Western country uses a combination of property tax and sales tax. And what are we coming up with? Property tax and sales tax. So this brings us back into the Western system rather than make us an outrider. So I'm going to pause there and hand back to you, Ros, for any questions.
Excellent, Paul. Thank you very much for that. And I think the point that we landed on that, just that last comment, was this isn't we know it should no longer be a property-based tax. It should be a business tax. That's it. So if you're a business, it applies to you. Lots of questions coming through. I know Alex has attempted to answer some of them, but we will explore them as well now, I think, just to give everybody a chance. But there's a couple of questions that came to mind that I thought might be an interesting start from my own perspective, Paul. You said that who could object to the combined business rates proposal, but I suppose you could argue that online businesses might object to it. So that's the first question. And then secondly, the digital tax approach has been previously explored. What is it that's different between what we're proposing and that previous discussion that most of us will have been familiar with?
Okay. Well, the first question about, yes, digital-based companies will object. This is this unique position of business rates as a tax that it's a zero-sum game. And most other taxes, they say, you pay 30% or 40% of your income, your profits, whatever. So it's just based on how your company works and how effective it is and how it's performed and a percentage of that. But business rates is totally divorced, really, now from the way in which the economy goes, or largely divorced from the way in which it goes. So the government will get its 26 billion, its 28 billion, whichever you're talking about, whatever. If the economy is collapsing, it will still get its 26 billion. The only time that it didn't happen is under that huge issue of COVID with the lockdown. But hey, you don't make policy around these one-off emergency events. So every year, the government will get its 26 billion. Now, What that means is this is a zero-sum game, because if you reduce the business rates bill for some, you've got to increase it for the others, because everything has to be revenue neutral, not going to be paid for by the Treasury, and therefore they want to get their 26 billion. So some go down, others go up. And it does pitch, small businesses against big businesses, London against the regions, high streets against digital. It is in a zero-sum game. You cannot avoid that. And unfortunately, that's where we are. So what is the answer to it? Well, the answer is twofold. Firstly, it's just the principle that all businesses should pay their fair share is item one. And yes, I realise digital that you won't, not going to like this as much, but effectively the high streets are subsidising you. Now, of course, the other element to that is that many high street businesses, many businesses generally, have a digital element and they have a high street element. So that's fine. It's not fine, but in this zero-sum game, what we'd see is that your high street element gets its 40% cut in business rates. Your digital element pays its fair share, and that's your combined business rate. So it's not really pitching one against the other. It's just what is the fairest way, most equitable way to pay for this 26 billion that has to come in. And the other thing I'd mention is that the government is saying very clearly throughout its consultation that part of this process is to level the playing field between the digital and the high street retailers. And what it's saying is, initially they were saying that Amazon, for example, will pay a lot more for their warehouses, and that will increase their costs, and that will help to decrease the costs on town centre. Retail, hospitality and leisure. Well, Alex's work looked into that, and of that 2.2 billion that the government can raise from this new higher rate multiplier, Amazon's contribution would be, and it's no disrespect to Amazon, it's just how the figures add up, 11 million. That's less than 0.5% of the total. It's not going to hit. They've only got 25 retail. They've only got 25 depots. You can't get 25 depots to pay for the cost of a reduction on nearly what is it? Probably nearly 750,000 properties in the high street. So the system that the government is proposing doesn't really do much to balance between digital and high street. The one that we're proposing does.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Well, also just in terms of the difference between what was proposed before versus now, I think the big difference is that what we're proposing is that we go back to the original 35p, or I know we're rounding that up, every penny counts, but 35p, so that actually those businesses, because I think the issue was before businesses were concerned, especially retailers, that they were going to be hit twice. Whereas this proposal accepts and recognises that actually that isn't fair, and so therefore we're proposing that we reduce the property tax to the 35p in the pound, and that 2% levy on the online sales plus the exemption, which is a very broad exemption and it needs to be explored in a lot more detail, is that those online sales that drive people to town centres or high streets would be exempt because they're already paying through their property rates bill. I've got loads of questions here, so we're going to move quickly to Alex, because you've done a good job of trying to answer some of these, but just let's share the love. So a really basic but important question was, what 35p per watt? Like, what is it we're talking about here?
The way the business
Alex, let Alex answer that, please.
Well, actually, I think Paul might be better to answer that. I mean, I think what we're talking about is the change in the poundage, which is, the reduction from 50 something pence at the moment to 35 pence in terms of the taxable rate per that businesses pays. That's right, isn't it, Paul?
I think let's the way in which your business rate bill comes. I guess most people know this. It's a multiple. It's what your rateable value is times the multiplier. That is your business rate bill. So let's assume your rateable value is 100,000, because that's easy to do the maths. 100,000 the current standard rate multiplier is 55.5p. So your business rates bill will be 100,000 times 55p, which is about £55,000. If what we're saying is that multiplier would go down to 35p, so instead of you paying 55,000, you'd pay 35,000. You get 20,000 off, which is a 40% discount. It's as simple as that.
And that would then encourage and really support the current government's ambition for growth, because that 20 grand reduction in that example will allow 20 grand to be spent on recruitment or investment, etc. And I think that's one of the key points that we're trying to make. We're not just trying to reduce the property owner tax for no reason. We're trying to encourage investment and growth in people and business. Alex, is what the government proposing a target on London?
So, as I think I said in the chat, you could sort of look at it that way, insofar that there seems to be a received wisdom, certainly within the Treasury, that you can basically throw anything at London and London will always sort of, survive. It'll sort of prosper. And that's true of successive governments of all political persuasions. Now, that position is not the same as it used to be. Before 2008, London's economy used to grow much more quickly than that of the rest of the country. Since then, that gap has closed. The problem is we're all poorer as a result. So the government, as was the case with the previous administration, is under intense pressure from less well-off parts of the country, the so-called Red Wall and all that areas, deprived areas outside of the southeast, to be seen to be doing something. They kind of always kind of look to London, it would appear, to bankroll those policies. The problem is, I think there's growing evidence that they may be reaching the limit of that approach now. And that's before you look at the politics of this, which we're not paid to do. But, it is a remarkable reflection that London, which is a predominantly Labour voting city at local government and national level, is kind of seen as being capable of taking these impositions without any real political consequence. But as I say, that's for the political scientists, not for the economists to worry about.
And there was another question here, perhaps Alex, again, you can answer, and that was, are we, with this multiplier and this £500,000 threshold, will it affect all businesses, or is it targeted at retail, hospitality and leisure?
No, it's everything. So anything, whether it's offices, whether it's local authority buildings, whether it's shops in St. James's,
hospitals, universities, libraries,
nearly all of it. And there's some discounts for certain institutions, but Westminster City Council will be paying more in business rates on its City Hall in Victoria Street. And they'll have to pay for that out of their own resources. By the way, they won't get any more resources as a result of paying more themselves. So everybody basically gets to pay. And just as an adjunct to that, Ros, there's something called the Central Rating List, which covers infrastructure, which doesn't normally sit in one borough, one rating authority. So these are our airports. This is gas and electricity transmission networks. The Treasury is also going after them and is limbering up to try and get tens of millions of pounds more, certainly out of Heathrow and City Airport and infrastructure. And again, unfortunately for London, it's an infrastructure heavy city, right? So there's more railways and there are more airports and various other things in London and the southeast than in other parts of the country. So that's an additional burden which we haven't even mentioned.
Yeah.
Can I add to that? That Alex said earlier in his presentation that from the impact assessment that he and colleagues undertook, they went through the rating list fully, and it's nearly 16,400 businesses that are currently over that 500,000 threshold, but they are actually 0.8% of the 2 million or so properties involved. So they're a very small number. Now, we're now hearing that, the large retailers, the large hospitality sector, we just heard about the wholesalers, are saying, oh, we need to be excluded from that. Well, if you take them out of that equation, you've left with an even smaller group of businesses that have got to carry the cost of this 2.2 billion. So it'll be fascinating to see what the government has agreed to do, because if they do make all these exclusions, it means that other businesses are going to have to pay more. And it may well mean that, the standard business rate multiplier has to go up in order to cover the cost of that. And then everybody ends up paying more. It's entertaining as observers, but a nightmare if you're a business.
I'm just mindful we've got 4 minutes left. Quick one, I'll do two questions together. Why hasn't the government done an impact study? And it makes me laugh because that's a very good question. Why haven't they? And also, how likely is government to take up our proposal, Paul?
Can I do those quickly, Alex?
Yeah.
Do you mind? Why haven't they done it? Because, and they're absolutely right, it all depends on the outcome of the revaluation, and the revaluation outcome we don't know until it's announced in the budget. So they couldn't do an impact assessment. We did an impact assessment based on the current valuations, but with all the caveats is that this will probably change. At least it gave us an idea, but the government hasn't done anything like that. So nobody really has any idea what they're thinking. I've forgotten the last one.
How likely are they to take up our proposal?
Well, as far as we can see, but others might tell us differently, the reason for making these changes now is to protect that 40% discount that many high street businesses get. So it's effectively yet another sticking plaster that's going to have to be paid for by business ratepayers. The actual real rates reform hasn't happened yet. And the feedback we're getting is that the government, once this is out of the way and past the budget, is open to listening to ideas for real rates reform, not just another sticking plaster to cover the fact that business rates have become too expensive for high street businesses.
Well, I think also when we did a comparison of the current government's approach to business rates versus what we were proposing, it was very aligned. And we both kind of honed in on Rachel Reeves' speech when someone asked the question that encouraged her to answer, we need to come up with a fairer system and we need to include online sales. So, with that in mind, that was very encouraging language for us.
Good. Yeah.
But how that will transpire, we'd only be guessing, wouldn't we? But we have been engaging at all levels, and with all parties. Haven't we, Paul? I mean, we've been a very Irish term is we've been engaging with everybody and their granny. Anybody with influence. They've received our proposal and we've been having conversations. But we suspect that actually the real conversation will happen post the budget announcement, not least because that's when we will understand the implications of the revaluation and everything else that goes with it.
And you can see on the HOLBA website, you can go in there and see the full report, both Alex's impact assessment, yes, HOLBA's response to the consultation, and most importantly, the combined business rate proposal, HOLBA's combined business rate proposal. And in there, you will find, as Roz has just said, a table that looks at the objectives that the government has set itself regarding business rates, about being fair, equitable, supporting the high street. And we've compared and said, this is what your current system, your 40% discount achieves, and not many of them, to be honest. And this is what HOLBA's combined business rates system achieves, and it achieves all of the government's objectives. So if the government is listening, I hope they're going to be listening to us.
Thank you very much, Paul. We didn't even have time to touch on reserves. I know you mentioned it in your opening chat, but another area that we're very mindful of is that both local authorities and businesses are hanging on to large reserves when they've challenged, their valuation. Something like 20,000 that's still unsolved since the 2023 revaluation, and obviously we're going to come up with the next revaluation. And as you say, Paul, VOA have merged with HMRC. There was a question in the chat, will the VOA be able to cope? Time will tell. I'm a glass half full type of person, so I'm hoping that with the merge of the two, and our proposal of this online sales, it actually I see the light at the end of the tunnel, which is with the merger of the two, there'll be a better understanding, better collaboration, and we might be able to speed up the process.
If it's as you just said, Ross, and they have merged, then I wouldn't be so concerned. They are going to merge, and they're in the process of doing it, and hope to have it finished by April 2026. And they will be doing that merger and transformation and reorganization at exactly the time that all this hits. So let's keep our fingers crossed that it runs very smoothly.
Okay, so I'm 1 minute over. My goodness, that's terrible as a chair. So I'm going to just close by thanking Alex and Paul for your time and all your hard work. And then thanks for everybody who's joined us today. Thank you for your questions. I think what's clear is that reform isn't just necessary. And my goodness, haven't we talked about it for years, but it's actually possible. Before we talked about reform, but really couldn't find a solution. We genuinely believe that the combined business rates option shows how you could create a fairer, simpler system that supports growth, which is in the manifesto pledges of all parties, attracts investment and jobs, and keeps not only London thriving, but the whole of the UK thriving, because as we know, if London does well, so too does the rest of the country. We finance the rest of the country. So as we head towards the budget, we're going to continue to make the case for this real rates reform, one that we believe will strengthen the economy and deliver for businesses and government. It'll deliver what everybody wants. Now, our ask of you, so there's no such thing as a free webinar, our ask of you is log on to the HOLBA website where our research is, and please share it far and wide. And stay engaged with us, especially post-budget. Share with us the impact on your business. And as Paul says, there's a calculator there. So as soon as the revaluation is announced, you'll be able to go in there and have a look. But I would like to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly, so we really want to be kept informed of how it's impacting the different types of businesses, different types of sectors. And also, we'd be more than happy to come and meet with you, attend roundtables, panels, etc. It's a very deep and very detailed conversation. And you can see that HOLBA has embraced the experts on that. And then ultimately, we want you to add your voice to the campaign for real rates reform. And as I say, it's on the website. We'll share the link just in case. And really, we want you to get behind the campaign for this real rates reform. And at risk of sounding like a politician, my team give me the phrase, together we can turn a broken system into one that works for everyone. So I'm going to end on that note. Thank you all very much. Please keep in touch.